Good evening, everybody. It's the 21st of March, and 100 years ago today, one of the biggest, most dramatic events in the history of this nation took place. I wonder whether you can guess what it was. I'll tell you about it later. Now, this morning, following on from the interview that we did last night on the show with Fishing for Leave, the fishing boat from Whitstable had come up the Thames overnight. Loaded onto it were some boxes of haddock that had been caught that were over quota, and so by law had to be thrown back dead. Okay. And the plan, of course, was that Jacob Rees-Mogg and some fellow Tory Brexiteers were going to board the boat, if you remember, and chuck the fish back into the Thames. But I sat in my office this morning in Westminster watching all this on cable television, and I saw that they weren't boarding the boat and that they weren't going to throw the fish back. So I got a call from Fishing for Leave. Would I come down and lend a hand? And we managed to time it all. Once I'd boarded the vessel and we were opposite the Houses of Parliament, I timed it all live on LBC's Nick Farage show this morning.
But let's go back to the river. I don't think I've ever said this before. Well, I've said we go to LBC's political editor, Theo Usherwood, but I was preparing to dump fish. Theo.
Nigel Farage has just got on the boat. I have got two really smelly haddock in my hand. I'm just trying not to gag Nick. I'm going to hand these fish to Nigel. Nigel, outside the Houses of Parliament here. Do the honours, throw them in.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is going on all over the country. And anyone that criticises these fish being put back in the Thames, go a few miles down the river and you will see every day thornback rays in abundance being shut back to rot on the seabed. The whole thing is a disaster.
Oh, there they go, and we've got more boxes going in now.
Yeah.
And so
now we have the dumping. Throw box of fish into the Thames.
There we go.
They sunk very quickly. I can't see them now. They've gone.
Here we go. One more. We've got another box here. We're dumping.
In it goes. Farage is now dumping fish in the Thames.
Yeah. There we go. It's another box. That's box two.
Absolutely tragic, the whole thing. What a waste. I mean, beautiful eating fish. And this is happening. 9% of the haddock quota is all the UK fleet gets from the European Union.
That is good fish, Nigel.
Oh, it's dreadful, isn't it? Absolutely breaks my heart to see that happening. But it's happening on a massive scale, every day, all over the country. Can people please wake up? Not just to what's happening to our industry, but the environmental disaster as well.
Still out from Theresa May.
Total and utter. You know, fishing is the acid test of Brexit, and they promised they would do it in 2019. They're now vaguely saying they might do it in 2021. I don't think any of them have frankly got the guts to stand up for what Brexit voters wanted. Well, agree or disagree, that wasn't bad live radio this morning, was it, on the Nick Farage show? If you'd said to me 20 years ago that I would be involved with a group of British fishermen in direct action, dumping fish into the Thames opposite the Houses of Parliament, I'd have said, you're having a laugh. That's the sort of thing the French do. They protest, they dump manure on the roads and cause all sorts of trouble. It's not the sort of thing we do, and yet that is what it's come to. I did it because nobody else would, I guess, but I did it not just to highlight the plight of Britain's commercial fishing industry, of Britain's anglers and their angling industry, but also the environmental disaster that has been the common fisheries policy, whereby we have thrown back dead millions of tons of fish into the sea over the last decades. It is truly, truly awful, and I wanted to try and help those fishermen to shine a light on what is really going on. Now, unsurprisingly, one or two people have criticised me. Tim Farron, the former Lib Dem leader and Member of Parliament, has reported me to Westminster City Council for fly tipping. This carries a maximum fine that runs into several digits, or possibly even a prison sentence. He, of course, has been joined by about 20 other people, and I'm now being condemned by environmental groups, Greenpeace, Friends of the Earth. Thames 21, Debbie Leach says, rivers are not places to simply dump things without a second thought. Today's dumping of fish increases pollution on an already strained ecosystem. Debbie, come with me next week to the lower reaches of the Thames River, and I will show you British fishermen throwing back rays, skate fish, chucking them back to rot in the Thames estuary in absolutely vast numbers. And any of you that don't believe me, go to lbc.co.uk, look at the video I made out of Ramsgate last year with a fisherman throwing back fish that weren't going to survive. So a lot of people are criticising me. Gary Lineker's even piled in, more about him in a few minutes. Sadly, Sir Bob Geldof wasn't on parade, because he and I had a rather famous 1-2 on the Thames during the referendum. I believe I did the right thing. But I'm asking you, was I right or wrong to do this? And if you think I'm a fool for doing it, call 0345 60 60 973. If you think, no, Nigel, you've helped the fishermen, and perhaps also you might just help our environment, then you can, of course, text to 84850, and I'll take virtually any comment on Twitter, provided it's clean, and you can use the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and as ever, you can watch us on Facebook and comment there too. I think what happened today was absolutely necessary. We already are dumping loads of fish into the Thames estuary, and you could argue that actually, far from breaking the law, we were obeying the law, because they were over quota fish. And it is outrageous that of the haddock that are caught in the European Union, the British quota is only 9%, and a lot of those fishermen down in Newlyn in Cornwall can get a whole month's quota of haddock in just one tow in the morning. Nick is calling me from Cornwall, from Helston, and he's a first-time caller to the show. Good evening, Nick.
Good evening, how are you?
Hi there. So, Nick, did I do the right thing, or was I highly irresponsible?
I think you were a bit irresponsible. With the referendum, I wavered between Remain and Leave. My two concerns were the Common Fisheries Policy and the Common Agriculture Policy. It's wrong to say that fishermen have to throw fish away. They're not allowed to sell them, but they could give them away. I think...
No, Nick. Nick. Nick, I'm going to stop you there for a moment, if I may. I was down at Newlyn about 7 or 8 years ago, Newlyn being the biggest English fishing port in the west of Cornwall, and one of the fishermen said to me, he said, look, if they're over quota, why can't we just give them to old people's homes? Why can't we give them to hospitals? And that was against the rules to do.
I would have thought that it would be much better for you to actually cook the fish, cook some potatoes. You would then have reflected our concerns about the Common Fisheries Policy and the Common Agriculture Policy at the same time, and have helped people.
Well, I tell you what,
want to do
Nick,
is show off.
I'll come back to that, but the next time we do this, please send us up some Cornish new potatoes, and we'll make it a sort of Cornish extravaganza. And far from showing off, it wasn't me that was supposed to do this, if you remember. It was supposed to be a group of Tory MPs who announced yesterday they were going to do it. It was written up the night before in the Telegraph. They chose...
Wasn't Jacob Rees-Mogg meant to be leading it and then wasn't allowed on the boat?
Whatever happened, but the fact is, Nick, I got a phone call from the leader of Fishing for Leave, basically saying, these guys aren't going to do it, would you please come to help? So that's exactly what I did. I bowled up, I jumped on the boat, and I helped them dump the fish. You can accuse me of showing off if you want to, but this wasn't planned. I was plugging a gap.
Wouldn't it have been better for you to actually cook the fish and the potatoes and give them...
well, maybe, and...
on Saturday morning TV.
Yeah, and we could have some English sparkling wine with it as well.
Cornish.
Sorry. It's all got to be Cornish. Right, I nearly forgot where I was for a moment. Nick, all I will say to you is this. I hope that over the next 24 hours, millions of people see what's happened and start to ask themselves questions about why we're throwing away prime fish that would be good eating. Why are we part of this environmental disaster?
Okay. What sort of potatoes do you want? New potatoes?
Oh, news. Yeah, news. I'll scrub them gently, make sure most of the skin stays on, and Nick, when we do this, you'll be the first person I serve.
It will be the Cornish Charlotte new potatoes.
Perfect. Look forward to it enormously. Well, there we are. Nick and I have solved the CFP and the CAP all in one fell swoop. Chris is calling from Bath. Good evening, Chris.
Hello, Nigel. I think you did absolutely the right thing. It was only your presence on the boat that ramped up this whole issue. So it's blown up like a nice big fat balloon. You've got all these little people enraged. All it does is it highlights the grasping, good fellas, thuggish-like nature of the EU bureaucrats who just want to dabble in our natural resources right until the last minute. You could not make it up.
You couldn't really, could you? No, you couldn't really. And the irony, Chris, I'm being criticised and condemned by a series of environmental groups, some of whom over the years have taken EU funding, and they're saying what I've done is bad for the environment, when every day, every day we're throwing back tens of thousands of fish, Chris.
This is just simple shroud waving by these tofu-munching liberals who are constant. Honestly, they are Brexiteers, zealots, right to the very core of their souls. And any issue that you get involved in, it's like a red rag to a bull, and they'll invent anything. I mean, Tim Farron, what an intellectual midget. How pathetic was that?
Well, he was leader of the Lib Dems, Chris. I mean, give the chap a break. And by the way, we did ask Tim Farron to come on the show, but he's on the train back to his northwestern constituency. I'd love to. So Tim has reported me to Westminster City Council, and tomorrow morning, Chris, the leader of Westminster City Council is going to be on the Nick Ferrari show. I think he's on at 7:20 tomorrow morning. I'll double check that. So do you think Westminster Council should prosecute me for what I did?
I think they should thank you for what you did. The common fisheries policies, as I understand it, with this lily-livered, I mean, the politicians, I mean, those fish that you threw back, were they whole or had they been gutted?
They were whole.
Okay, well, at least they've got their guts in. Our negotiators are totally gutted.
Well, on that, Chris, that's a wonderful note to it. That's a wonderful note to end the call. Thank you. Well, we'll find out tomorrow, because I'll be in Brussels tomorrow night, attending the EU summit, and we'll see how much spine, backbone or guts the British negotiators and leaders have tomorrow. In a minute, I'll tell you Gary Lineker's intervention in this debate, and I'll ask the question, is he the new Sir Bob Geldof? Our fishing industry are desperate. Not only have we seen tens of thousands of jobs lost in this industry since we joined the common market all those years ago, but the promise that was made by this government that we'd take back control of our waters once we left has been broken. We're now told, no. For the transition period, we will stay part of that common fisheries policy, and by the way, no firm promises that even at the end of that extra 21 months that anything is going to be solved. And so they had their protest today on the Thames. They came up the Thames to dump some over-quota haddock, and I gave them a hand. And I'm asking you, did I do the right thing or the wrong thing? Now, Gary Lineker very clearly thinks I did the wrong thing. So a photograph of myself and Aaron Brown, who runs Fishing for Leave, this photograph appeared on Twitter of us pouring a box of haddock into the Thames opposite Parliament. Gary Lineker tweets, rarely have two such slimy, smelly, slippery creatures held onto some fish. So, you're doing it again, Gary, aren't you? I said, Gary thinks it's funny that an entire British industry has been devastated. He is in the same category as Bob Geldof. I should have said, Sir Bob Geldof. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. He then responds saying, well, you think you're funny, but why didn't you bother to turn up to the European Parliament Fisheries Committee? The answer to which was, Gary, it had no legislative power at all, was a talking shop and a waste of time. You can't reform the common fisheries policy. You have to leave it to make things better. But, Gary, you can abuse me if you want to, but why do you choose to call a hard-working Scottish fisherman slimy, smelly and slippery? I don't think that's very clever. Hey-ho, I'm going to the Netherlands to speak to Lynn. Hello.
Hello, no, actually, Nigel, it's Gordon.
Gordon, sorry. And you living in Lynn, are you?
No problem, yeah.
Good.
Well, I come from Grimsby, and I can remember seeing the decline of the Bird's Eye and the Findus fleet.
Yep.
I can remember seeing the last day of that boat coming in and seeing fully grown men crying their eyes out as that last boat ever came in. Now, if you take into consideration of how many jobs, if we get back our deep-sea trawlers, how many jobs per man would that bring back into the UK from water to table?
Well, Gordon,
I asked that question on Facebook, and
yep.
the amount of replies that I got was unbelievable. Now, you're talking about at least 3 to 4 million jobs here that will be created, not only on the beachside, but even inland.
Well, I wouldn't go as far as that, but you're quite right. I mean, you know, an active fishing industry means the chain makers in Birmingham are busier making chain and so on and so forth.
Very true.
I wouldn't agree with 3 to 4 million, but would this be a significant boost for the UK economy? Yes, it would.
Be a massive boost, Nigel.
And I mean, Grimsby has gone from about 300 trawlers to about 8, I think it is now.
If you're lucky, they're only snibbies. We used to have deep sea trawlers. That's the big stern end ones. So then that massively went into decline. The town became an actual dead end. We used to have great, fantastic smokehouses for haddock, and even herring and God knows what else. But at the end of the day, when I look at the Dutch, their fleet have trebled over the years. They catch our fish in our waters and then sell it back to us at inflated prices.
You couldn't really invent it, could you? You couldn't really invent it.
Nigel, to be honest, people need to wake up and smell the coffee, can we say?
Well, I did.
As it goes for Gary Lineker, he wants to go back. He wants to go back advertising crisp, because what he knows about fishing, he can write on the top of a pinhead.
Well, Gordon, the one thing I do know is that where Grimsby and Hull lost out, of course, was when Iceland beat us in the Cod War. But that redefined international territorial waters in 1976, and so Grimsby should have 200 miles of the North Sea, which is our exclusive economic zone, just as Norway across the other side of the North Sea has. And Gordon, if we took that back, if we took back what is rightfully ours, it would completely regenerate Grimsby, Hull, and much of the east coast of England. Gordon, I thank you for your call and for your memories of what Grimsby once was, but sadly no longer is. Tom says by text, Tim Farron could have fed the 5,000 with a couple of those haddock. What were you thinking of? Very good. Michael says, we're a seafaring nation. Economics apart, fishing is part of our national psyche and must be honoured. You honoured it today, and for that, thank you. You're kidding, right? They're saying it's an environmental disaster because you dump fish. Isn't that something that fishermen have to do every day as a result of EU-imposed quotas? Oh, the hypocrisy. I agree. Antonio is a first-time caller to our show, and he calls from Derby. Hello.
Hello, Nigel. So what I think about your, I don't know what to call it, because for me it's more of a masquerade than a stunt. I really don't know how to define it. But
a masquerade? Why is it a masquerade, Antonio?
Because it has no practical purpose apart from the fact of giving you a bit of relevance on the public stage now that the Brexit referendum has been won. Of course, you can understand that being an Italian citizen, you and I are not really compatible. You can understand that, can't you?
No, do you know what, Antonio? I went to lunch today in a London hotel, and the doorman was Italian. Oh, how pleased I am to meet you, Mr. Farage. Weren't the Italian election results exciting? It's good to see that Italy's now become a Eurosceptic country. So why can you and I not be compatible?
Well, because you put my rights and livelihood at risk with the Brexit referendum. That's
really
why I've chosen to come over here for work. I work full-time over here. I have a master's degree. I'm an engineer. And all of a sudden, I have no certainty over my rights to stay in this country because of what you've done.
Antonio, anybody that came to this country legally
stage is not that massive as you might.
Antonio, listen, I'm sorry, this is absolute total nonsense. Anybody that came to this, anybody that came to this country legally is allowed to stay. But what we are going to do with Brexit, I hope, is to limit the numbers of people that come in the future, because we had net migration running at 10 times its steady post-war average.
Look at the unemployment rate. It's at record low. So you need people to come over here and do the work that is required for the UK economy. Well, if you limit the amount of people, you will limit the growth of the economy.
Well, what I was trying to do today, Antonio, what I was trying to do today was to make sure that we get thousands of jobs back in our fishing industry.
and we know people to fill them. But anyway, about the fishing industry in particular, I have no knowledge of the fishing industry and no knowledge of the fishing policy, the common policy of the European Union. I have no idea of what that is.
So what prompted you to call, Antonio?
You are so passionate about that in 42 meetings in the European Commission you went only to one or two.
Please.
So your passion was
Antonio.
And also,
it had
one other thing.
No. You wait. It had no legislative power. It was a waste of time.
Well, okay, you say that. I don't think so, because
it had no legislative power, Antonio.
Okay. Well,
but the Commission had the power. Oh yes, the people you can't vote for and can't remove, they had the power.
No, you vote for them in the European election. You vote for your MPs.
You do not, Antonio. You do not vote for European commissioners. They are appointed.
No. Yeah, the commissioners, yes, but the Parliament is not.
The Parliament.
So you were elected as a member of the Parliament.
Antonio, the
right?
European Parliament. The European Parliament cannot propose legislation and cannot propose the repeal of legislation. That is all done by the unelected Commission, and under that ambit comes fisheries. And not only, and I'd put this to you, Antonio, not only has the common fisheries policy been bad for British industry, but environmentally it's been a disaster. And that's what that image of those haddock being chucked back today, don't you agree with me there's something fundamentally wrong with that?
Again, I have no knowledge of the common fishery policy.
Fine. Well, I tell you what, it's lovely for you to call, but let's get somebody with some knowledge and who knows perhaps a little bit more about this. I'm going to try Chris, a first-time caller from Royston in Hertfordshire. Good evening.
Hello, Nigel. How are you? All right?
I am well, thank you. But I mean, Chris, I'm under assault. You know the.
No, you're perfectly right. I mean, I'm a chef. I know how much it is to get fish. You know, when we buy fish. I mean, I've seen it with Hugh Fernley Whittingstall.
Yes.
They chuck so much fish away, it's unbelievable. How the hell can you tell a trawler, sorry, we're not going to catch eucalyptus today, we're going to catch haddock?
I'm afraid, Chris, in mixed fisheries it can't be done, yeah.
No, it can't be done. I mean, we've got these fish. I mean, he was chucking fish away and giving fish away. You know, have this, because the poor fishermen, they've got their quotas, haven't they? And they've got to chuck it away. It's not right. It's not right that they can come into our waters and take all our fish when we have got low quotas.
Well, I feel that way, Chris, too. Tell me, Chris, as a chef, how do we get the Brits to eat more fish? Because we're not really eating a lot, are we?
It's too expensive. Because langoustines and that are caught in Scotland. They go abroad to Spain. We then have to buy them back from Spain, and that's where the cost is.
Yeah, so actually, if we do leave the CFP properly at some point, I pray we do.
It would be a lot cheaper.
Cheaper fish, healthy food, sustainable food. Chris, you're a star. Thank you. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. I hope the boys dump fish in the Thames today. They were over quota haddock. Did I do the right thing or the wrong thing? I'm also going to tell you what happened 100 years ago today. One of the most traumatic events ever to befall this country. But before we do all of that, let's look at the Foreign Affairs Committee sitting this morning in London. Ian Austin MP for Dudley was speaking, and of course the conversation inevitably was Putin and Russia.
They got the right to stay to the World Cup, clearly through corruption. Putin's going to use it the way Hitler used the 1936 Olympics. The idea of Putin handing over the World Cup to the captain of the winning team.
I'm afraid that's completely right. Well, that's completely right.
The idea of Putin using this as a PR exercise to gloss over the brutal, corrupt regime for which he's responsible fills me with horror.
Let me say, Mr. Austin, first of all, I think that your characterisation of what is going to happen in Moscow, in the World Cup, or in all the venues, yes, I think the comparison with 1936 is certainly right.
Oh, really? Honestly, I don't think Hitler should ever be used as a comparison for anything. I think it's ridiculous. And what is it? We had Ken Livingstone, and now we've got Boris Johnson. You know, and to compare Putin to Hitler, to say the World Cup will be like the 1936 Olympics, Boris, I don't think that's a very sensible thing to have said and done. Please, can we all stop ever using Hitler as a reference point for anything? I think it's a mistake. I think what he did was uniquely evil, and however much you may dislike figures on the world stage, to compare them to Hitler, I think really is irresponsible and wrong. Back to fishing. Did I do the right thing in helping those fishermen dump haddock this morning, or was I grossly irresponsible, or, as one caller suggested, simply just showing off? I'm going to go to Brian, who's calling from Stockton. Good evening.
Good evening, Nigel.
So, was I right to help those fishermen today or not?
Yes, definitely. The only Brexit Conservative anywhere near was Jacob Rees-Mogg, and even he said, I can put up with this as long as the end deal is okay. No other Brexit here, they say they're bothered about the fishing rights. They're only bothered about the deal at the end, really. They're giving everything away, and even the Brexiteers now, I'm getting very worried. Yes, we need people like you, Nigel, definitely, because when it comes to the end of the deal even, still keep giving things away. We can't trust them, can we?
I have a real problem, Brian, in trusting them, because there was a very specific promise made that when we left the European Union, we'd take back control of our waters. I mean, the argument, Brian, they would make, and they wouldn't make it in public, but they'd make it in private, is that they've got to make lots of concessions now, because we need to get over the hurdle of March the 29th next year, which is nearly a year to the day, isn't it? And provided they can get past March 29th, we will have left the Treaty of Rome, we will have left the European Union, and then we can start negotiating on a much tougher basis. That, Brian, is the argument they give me in private. But I'm not sure these people, frankly, have actually got the backbone to stand up and fight.
Correct. I mean, the thing is, when it comes to even after the transition in 2021, was it?
Yeah. Well, the end of 2020, in theory. 2020, yeah. And this is, Brian, this is the deal that should get agreed in Brussels tomorrow night.
Yeah, but how can we trust the Conservative government, who are in charge of this, to even deliver then, Nigel, as I keep saying? You know, the reason we are giving all this away is because the likes of Clark, Soubry, Grieve, all the Conservative rebels, Wollaston, Tim Farron's, when he was Liberal, the bloke in charge now, and...
Sir Vince Cable is the bloke in charge now.
Vince Cable. All these people, SNP, a lot of them, right, have got her frightened, haven't they? They've got Theresa the appeaser now, haven't they? They've got her frightened, but really, in truth, and so she's doing all these things to appease everybody, and now I think that we've got to a situation where if we don't, at the end of this month, we find out more, and especially the lead up to, is it November? I think, Nigel, if this continues, we still haven't got the thing about the business side, have we? They haven't said they're going to even give us that. They say they're going to give us trade, which is beneficial to them.
Wow.
But they haven't still even said they're going to give us the, what do they call it in London, the banks and all that.
The can has been kicked down the road, Brian. The can has been kicked down the road, and your level of confidence in this government, I'm afraid there are many Brexiteers feeling as you do. Brian, I thank you very much for your call, and Brian, they're sounding pretty disillusioned with the whole thing. Jerry says to me, chuck the fish in the Thames, it's small fry compared with the fish that is thrown away because we're not allowed to take it from our seas. Matt says, I bet you weren't fighting for the miners or the steel industry or the shipbuilders while your heroine Maggie was devastating them, ripping communities apart at the stroke of her pen. You're a fraud. This is all just a desperate attempt to stay relevant. Well, no, Matt, I was asked at the last minute to go in and help. And by the way, I have to say that I thought when the Union of Democratic Mine Workers broke away from Arthur Scargill in 1984, they proceeded to break every production record for British coalfields in the late 1980s, and then, in the major government, most of them lost their jobs, and I felt very, very sad for those people indeed. That was, I think, a terrible, awful betrayal. Annette says, in terms of protests, I thought yours today was somewhat pathetic. You need to take a lesson from the French farmers. Annette, you're right. You know, when the French smallholders protest, they close Paris down. That wasn't my intention, but my intention was to raise the plight of the industry, to raise the environmental concerns, and I hope to put a bit more pressure on the Prime Minister to do something different. On tweet I get, why do these fishermen keep overfishing? So they have to throw loads back. If they caught less, surely they would kill less fish. Look, if you've got a stock that is in decline, yes, it needs to be managed. Yes, you need to try to catch fewer of them. The point about haddock is haddock stocks, both in the West Country and up in the northern North Sea, right at the moment, are phenomenally healthy. Some people say there are more haddock there now than there have been for 40 years, and yet the quota system takes no account of that, and Britain only gets 9% of the quota. It's ludicrous. Absolutely right to stand up for the rights of British fishermen during a time when their futures are being used as a shameful bargaining chip. I don't know who sent that by Twitter, but you're absolutely right. The fishing industry was used as a bargaining chip when we joined, and now it's being used as a bargaining chip as we're leaving, and it's not acceptable. Omar is a first-time caller from Shepherd's Bush. Good evening.
Hello, good evening. What I want to say basically is, what is worse, throwing some fish into the Thames as a protest or depleting British fishing waters? The EU is taking advantage of our bureaucracy and our political divisions. Since the EU was allowed to fish in British waters, apparently EU fish populations have increased.
Well, Omar, stocks vary. Stocks have good periods, and stocks have bad periods, species by species. But Omar, wouldn't it be perhaps more sensible to look at the way Norway manages her half of the North Sea, where all discards are illegal, where they've got a thriving fishing industry, a big angling industry, and thousands of British anglers now going over every year to fish there, and they manage their own resource, they do it properly. Wouldn't we be better, Omar, to do it the way the Norwegians do?
Well, I feel as long as the British people have priority access to British fish and we show unity against the EU in this matter, then that's how we could be successful in all aspects of the EU.
And why do you think, Omar, that we don't have that unity of purpose in Parliament or throughout civil society?
Because basically you see the bickering, politicians insulting one another over small matters and trying to get one up each other, basically, just so they can be elected for office and for personal gains instead of considering the welfare of the country.
So it's climbing the greasy pole. It's career politics first and it's country second, in your opinion?
Yes, that's sadly what seems to be the case.
And when are you going to get involved in politics?
Well, as soon as I'm old enough.
How old are you, Omar?
16.
16. I had a feeling you might be a young caller. And you sound pretty fiercely Eurosceptic, Omar.
Yes, I feel that the British public and the British and Britain should come first, because it's the British government, not the European government. That our government should put priority on the British people.
Do you know what? There's a chap in America who says America first, but not alone, by which he means he wants to put the interest of his own country first, but he'll work as a friend and a neighbour with others. That, Omar, is exactly what the British government should be doing, and if people thought that's what Theresa May was doing with the Brexit process, they would cheer her to the rafters. Omar, thank you very much indeed. That was a great call. So I don't know. All these complaints going in, accusing me of fly tipping to Westminster City Council. I don't know whether they're going to prosecute, but the leader of Westminster is on with Nick Ferrari tomorrow morning here on LBC. I said earlier I thought it was 7:20. I am wrong. Hands up. He's actually going to be on at 8:50. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. Well, first thing tomorrow morning, I will be off to Brussels, where there is the big European summit, at which we are supposed to agree the transition deal. And, of course, right in the middle of all of that is fishing, whereby we've decided that when we leave the European Union, we're going to immediately opt back into the common fisheries policy, which is what today's fish dumping on the Thames opposite Parliament was all about. I'll be there. I'll do my show from there. Theo Usherwood, LBC's political editor, will be there for the day as well. We'll see. You know, will Theresa suddenly show us, as she's done with Russia, just how tough and strong and heroic she can be? We'll have to wait and see. Breaking news, Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg has admitted the firm made mistakes and is working to understand exactly what happened in a statement following the Cambridge Analytica scandal. So isn't it interesting? This is now bouncing back on Facebook in quite a big way. And I do think a lot of people who use Facebook, who perhaps have thought to themselves over the last 2 or 3 days, gosh, I didn't quite realise the extent to which my data and what I say on Facebook can be used. Be very interesting to see what Zuckerberg has to say later. On fishing, David says, Nigel, it's time the government now started to plan and invest in our fishing industry in preparation for us taking back our waters. There's no point waiting until we're finally out of this ridiculous transition. Let the government show their commitment for the future of our industry. Do you know what, David? If the government announced, you know, that it was setting up some boat building schemes or whatever to prepare for when we left the common fisheries policy, if they did that, we might just start to trust them. But right at the moment, that's a very, very difficult thing to do. That's my view. I wonder what the view of Nick in Newbury is. Good evening, Nick.
Nigel, where are all the thousands of angry fishermen?
Working.
Your little stunt.
Well,
I personally think you made a fool of yourself, quite frankly. You didn't address the problem whatsoever.
Well, point one, Nick, it wasn't my stunt. It wasn't my stunt. I was called in at the last minute. The stunt that I was involved in was the flotilla on the Thames, back at the time of the referendum, and we were allowed by the Port of London Authority to take 35 boats up the Thames. Had that limit not been there, we'd have put 300 up the Thames, Nick.
Yeah, but the TfL, the Transport for London, didn't agree, did they? But no, that's not the point I'm trying to make.
Go on.
Is where was your so-called Brexit Prime Minister in waiting, Jacob Rees-Mogg? Why didn't he come down? Was he going to get seasick or something? Or
he was on the quayside earlier. He was there, and he did say some very encouraging words for the fishermen. And he did say that he finds this part of the transition deal unacceptable.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you why it's unacceptable, because common fisheries is just an impossible thing to administer. There will always, even British fishermen, even before we went into the EU or the common market then, British fishermen had to go beyond our waters to fish. And it was perfectly legitimate.
Well, Nick,
and so
things have changed, Nick.
Fish do not have any borders. The sea does not have any borders. Therefore, British fishermen now are going beyond our borders to fish. It's the only way. And that is why it's just been badly administered. It's not necessarily the point of the problem of the EU.
Nick, the common fisheries policy works on the principle of equal access to a common resource.
Yes.
And in this case, that means us giving away a huge chunk of our fish to the rest of the European fleet. That's the problem, Nick. We have got the richest fishing waters of any European nation. And what I'm suggesting, Nick, is this. We do what Norway does. We say, right, 200 miles of the North Sea is ours, and the median line in the Channel is ours. We're quite prepared to work with other nations. We understand that many have been fishing there for years, and we need to sort of slowly phase out the amount they're catching. We're not going to stop foreign boats fishing in our waters, but we will charge them money for the privilege of doing so, and we will ban discards. We will put a sensible environmental policy in place. Nick, wouldn't that make a damn sight more sense than the current quota regime that we've got?
No, it won't do, because it won't make a slightest bit of difference whatsoever, because British fishermen will go and encroach in other areas as well.
Nick, I don't think...
It's part of the common fisheries policy.
Well, we shouldn't be part of the common fisheries policy, Nick. It's a failure. It's one of the worst policies Brussels has ever put in place. And when you talk to people from the Faroes or Iceland or Greenland, who of course left the EEC because of the common fisheries policy, when you look at how those nations run their fisheries, both from a commercial perspective and from an environmental perspective, Nick, I think we could do a damn sight better with our waters than a bureaucrat in Brussels.
Well, I think you're wrong because I don't think it will work. And the only problem is it could be administered a lot better.
But why isn't it, Nick?
It can be administered a lot better. But adopting this stunt of just throwing fish back just because of over quotas, it's pretty childish, I think, Nigel.
Fair enough, Nick. You're fully entitled to your point of view, and that's the joy of LBC. So Nick thinks I'm childish. Earlier caller thought I was showing off. Hey, that's what opinion is all about. By text I get, Nigel, if you give a British fisherman a haddock and some Cornish potatoes, he'll eat for a day. Give him access to his own fishing waters, and he'll feed the country. Well done, Dory. That's great. Gilly says, yes, of course, Nigel was right. Somebody had to stand up and be counted. Yellow belly Conservatives didn't. Well, that's your opinion, Gilly. I thought the words that Jacob Rees-Mogg spoke on the quayside this morning were very encouraging. Would like to have seen him got on the boat, really, but hey. Luke is calling from Orpington. Good evening, Luke.
Good evening, Nigel, and thank you for having us. Nigel, I don't know if you remember me, but we met in Biggin Hill at the Biggin Business, which you were supporting at Biggin Hill Air Show.
I spoke at the... I did speak there, absolutely. Do you know what, Luke? When I get invited to go and speak to local business groups of small entrepreneurs, I love doing it.
Well, you did absolutely great. And do you remember the Eurofighter kept on going over the top as you were trying to speak?
I think it was deliberate. It was. In fact, it was I've never been heckled quite as effectively as by a Eurofighter coming over at 200 feet. You're quite right. You're quite right. So, Luke, come on, tell me, was I right or wrong today?
I think you did very well. You pretty much right on most things. Listen, Boris may have compared Putin to Hitler. Yep. I'd more likely compare you to Churchill.
Oh, I don't know about that. I think any comparisons with Churchill are wholly unfair. I don't drink anything like as much as Churchill did.
You're keeping Britain sovereign, and I think that ultimately the fishing waters should remain British. It's one of our borrowing tools, and I would like to say, what would Trump do? We should ask.
Well, do you know what? Do you know what, Luke? One of the fishing lads on the boat today said, "Imagine President Trump was our Prime Minister. Do you think he'd accept a 2-year transition with foreign boats fishing in our waters?" And the answer is he wouldn't, would he, Luke? He just wouldn't do it.
He wouldn't have stand up to him. Can I just ask you, what will happen if we come out of Europe at the end of these negotiations and end up saying, you know what, let's get back down on some of these things that we came to? What would be the consequences for Britain if we did?
Well, if we leave the Treaty of Rome next year, we've left the European Union, and however bad a deal the government has done, we as a sovereign nation will, at elections, be able to unpick the whole lot, and that is exactly, I think, what we'll need to do. Smashing Luke, thanks ever so much for your call. Caroline says, Nigel, you did the right thing and highlighted in 10 minutes what has been happening for years. Well done. So 100 years ago today, the 21st of March, 1918, Russia had been knocked out of the war, the First World War, militarily, and the communists were in charge. That allowed the Germans to bring 2 million troops back to the Western Front, and their most successful General and Field Marshal of the First World War, Ludendorff, to take command. This was the big German push. We'd been expecting it for absolutely months. We didn't know when it would fall or where it would fall, but at dawn on the 21st of March 1918, out of a thick fog, the Germans attacked us on a 50-mile front. It's difficult to know exactly what the figures were for that day, so chaotic was it, but something like 10,000 British soldiers were killed this day 100 years ago, 10,000 were seriously wounded, and 21,000 were taken prisoner. It was the beginning of a few weeks of massive German advances. They came within a whisker of winning the First World War. It wasn't until the middle of the summer that we managed to counter and get back to victory. So spare a thought for those tens of thousands of people caught up in that carnage, taken as prisoners 100 years ago today. And whatever difficulties we may have with the common fisheries policy, there is nothing compared to what our forebears had to go through. I'm off to Brussels first thing in the morning. I'll speak to you tomorrow from the European Summit. I'm waiting to see Theresa stand up strong for the fishing industry, but I won't be holding my breath. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show.